now we're live, I think.
All right. I'm going to exit full screen so I can see you. Hi, Mike.
Hey, buddy. Is it so I can't see anything yet either because my computer's running a second behind, but this seems to be like the way each one of my things start out. All right. So, hi, Scott.
Hi, Mike. How are you, my friend?
Good. Thanks for being on this episode. And I stole this little bit from you. Introduce yourself.
My name's Scott Haggerty. I live here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a phone salesman for real estate software, and Mike and I go way back. We're definitely more than acquaintances. We're longtime friends who just don't see each other as often as we should.
Definitely. Thanks. That makes me feel good. Heck yeah. Scott, Scott and I used to work together. We bartended for a long time together, and we have a special bond because we had Friday nights together every Friday night. And if you're a bartender, any job you get, you got that one person you click with, but a Friday night is something different than anything else. When you have that
you
whole
not only
crowd,
have to, you don't have to get along with everybody, but you have to actually work.
and you got
sort of anyway.
And I learned a lot from Scott, and I always looked up to Scott. And Scott,
sorry.
So Scott does his own show. He has something called Panel. He calls Panel. You can catch it on Facebook on his page, or he has a YouTube channel. And what he does is, and take it if I'm wrong, but I think what you're just trying to do is catch all the different ways that the quarantine and the pandemic has affected people, especially different lines of work. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it came specifically just out of a desire to talk to these folks myself and to hear what people were saying. I wanted to get something different than, because when I first started doing it, all that we were getting on the news was numbers, and then and now all we get on the news is reopening and conflict. Right. So that was the idea, was that I selfishly wanted to talk to them. And it was a great opportunity to reconnect with people I hadn't spoken to in a while. And it was actually kind of amazing to find that I had so many friends and acquaintances in so many different walks of life. And I really feel like I've just kind of scratched the surface. It's going to be interesting to see how the next few weeks goes.
Yeah. I mean, and Scott doing that, he asked me to come on and talk to him about
as school,
as a teacher, right?
Yeah.
What's going on. And I jumped on that opportunity, and then I thought, wow, what Scott's doing here is really cool. And how can I use my time at home to kind of do what Scott's doing? And that's where this whole thing
yours is so much more cerebral, and yours is, and see, that's the thing, is I'm already starting to think how I'm going to, if I'm going to keep doing mine, eventually I'm going to have to dovetail into other subject matters.
Yeah, well,
maybe not.
Maybe, yeah. I was going to say you got a lot going. I mean, with all the different, like you said, conversations you have with people, it's interesting. I don't know half the people you talk to. Your last one was an awesome interview. I knew Mike, but I did not know the lady you were talking to. She was the head of the Heartless Bastards, right?
Yeah, Erica Winterstrom. That was super nice of her, because she barely knows me. I mean, I was literally like someone that came into the Arlen's she worked at years ago in Clifton, and that was super. Cool. It was super nice for her to come on, and I hope she'll do it again sometime. Erica, by the way, just a couple of days, maybe even the day after we did that, she actually posted a great video of herself eating a sandwich.
What? Awesome. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. It's funny because but it's great. There's a couple points in it where you could tell she doesn't want to laugh, but she's eating a sandwich.
That's awesome. No, but and I'm a big Andrew Bird fan, and I knew who she was, but I didn't. So I mean, a lot of your conversations are like that. They're for everybody, whether you know the people or not, which is really cool.
Yeah, they end up being fun. A lot of F-bombs.
That's all right. And they're welcome here too. Scott and I are going to discuss this book, Jonathan Kozol, Savage Inequalities, and I'd like to start out with this question. So when I asked Scott to do this show, I said pick a book, and this book you chose. I've never read it. I read it this week,
which I found interesting.
Book. Yeah,
I found interesting that you'd never read it.
Well, I was supposed to read it. So
it was a school thing, because it came out in what? It came out in what? 94?
Right, and it was a school. It definitely was something I was supposed to read in my master's program.
No shit.
Yeah, and you do a lot of quoting of him, and we used him a lot, but it was one
Yeah.
of those things where you could use statistics or little things. I didn't actually have to read the book, and that's one of the things my daughter
Well, he's
mentioned
done.
when
I'm
we had
sorry.
our thing. No, you're fine. Is when something's assigned to me, I don't want to do it.
I think it's true. A lot of people. I think it's kind of human nature to avoid the have to. That's a discussion I've had with my kids many times over the years, trying to get them, encourage them to do their various required stuff. And I always tell them, you do the stuff you have to do so you can do the stuff you want to do.
Sure.
And that's kind of what life's like. You're going to establish this pattern.
But reading is different because you can skirt it. You know what I mean? In reading is one of those, and that's how. I mean, I got through.
You can. We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out how much you can skirt reading here tonight.
But you did read it, and I did read it this week. And I want to pick. I guess my first question is, why this book? What was it about this book that you wanted to talk about, or did you find interesting, or why did you remember this book? Because you read it, you said.
Well, you and I were talking. Yeah. Well, I read it not long after it first came out. And I haven't read it since. I ordered a copy, and for whatever reason, the pandemic has prevented me from acquiring it.
Books in the mail.
Right, it is in the mail. As is the next one we're going to do. I ordered that too because I figured if we schedule that for October, I'll have a good chance of getting that book.
First week of October. What's the name of the book?
The Death of Expertise.
There you go. So stay tuned.
Which is not, which isn't much different than the book we're discussing, really, when we start getting into the nuts and bolts of it. I literally just mentioned this book because I assumed, as a teacher and a relatively intellectual individual yourself, like I didn't go to college, and I am not, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not dedicated. I'm not dedicated or idealistic enough to have done something that's a big contribution to society, such as teaching. And I'm not trying to suck you off or anything. I'm just saying that it's a respectable thing, especially in the United States, where it's not exactly. It's a well thought of position in certain circles, but it's certainly not a financial bonanza, and I almost think it should be, but we'll get to that too. And that's why I thought of this book, is because you're a teacher, and to tell you the truth, I assumed you had read it at some point, because it seemed like it made a pretty big splash at the time. Because this was
it did.
If I remember right, this was Kozol's first foray into this kind of like sociological discussion on education. But didn't he do a couple others since then? Hasn't there been some follow-ups to this that were more specific about? I think it seems like, and I'm talking out my ass here because I don't know for sure, but it seems like there was one on like university life connected to it, and there was one on corporate education, like internships and shit like that.
After one yes. And then he had another book that was another big one, The Shame of the Nation, which came out 2005.
And that's just the state of education, right? That's the shame of the nation.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And then The Lives of the Conscious of the Children. Yeah. So he's sticking with the same theme. It's education in America.
The thing that struck me about this book, kind of generally speaking, and again, I didn't get to reread it, and I glanced at your. I'm sorry, I did a little, glance around, and I just figured, this is a jumping off point for a bigger conversation that I don't think you're going to mind having. So,
no, and you're right. And honestly, if you read this book once, you get the main gist. And the thing is we live in society. Everybody knows what this book is telling us.
Yeah,
everyone. You can't not.
And that's one of the things I wanted to discuss with you in particular, is just kind of like, especially now in the with the backdrop of this pandemic, there's a certain amount of acceptance of things in this country that I find alarming. And one of the things is that our educational system is a joke, and it's not like people don't understand. And what I think the general gist of Kozol's book here is that it's kind of a joke for deliberate and specific reasons. It's and I wish I wish there were I wish I'd read it more recently. But it's just just the whole idea of the whole. And everybody knew it was a bad idea when it happened, when they started tying federal funding for schools to test scores. And everybody, it's not like nobody thought that was a good idea. I mean, it was anyway. But and it's something that's proceeded apace, and it's something that hasn't been remedied. And it's a tragedy, but it kind of, for me anyway, what it did was it kind of pointed up some much larger societal issues that this situation just exacerbates. Just, obviously income inequality and racial inequality and, single parenting. And there's a whole can of worms that this book opens. And it's one of these books where it's just like the United States really needs to take a hard look at themselves and ask themselves why we're here. And there's a lot of clear answers to that.
And just how hypocritical we're being when we say that we believe in equality. And
Jesus, yeah.
And I'll tell you, just as a teacher and going through teaching, how much we go through and as a teacher while I'm teaching my students. But what I learned in my master's program of this is how much we talk about Plessy versus Ferguson, and then we talk about Board versus the Brown of education, how far we've come. Like this trajectory.
How far have we come?
Right. As we're moving forward, for those of you that may not be familiar, Plessy versus Ferguson, late 1800s said that, hey, we can keep the races separate, but that's where the whole separate but equal, you can be separate,
right.
That's fine, but they have to be equal. You can't let Black people have something that's inferior to white people. And what they found out then in 1954, yeah, exactly, right. And then in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education said, no, that does not work. It just inherently does not work. You cannot say if it's going to be separate, it's never going to be equal. Okay, it's going to be inferior. So we thought in 1954 we're headed in this new direction that desegregation and real true equality. And what I'll tell you, the biggest thing in this book for me was and you may know this, but the San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez of 1973.
But this was an integration case, right? Like
this was a school funding. No, this was a school
it was a funding one.
Case.
Okay, go ahead.
And it ruled against Texas. Actually found Rodriguez, this guy that was fighting for equality in school funding. Texas was on his side. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled in 1973 that the financial system in Texas did not violate the 14th Amendment. This ruling actually takes us to Plessy versus Ferguson,
right?
Because it actually says
the Supreme Court ruling says,
and they don't have to be equal.
Right.
Which is that actually out of the whole book, you read about these miserable lives. We're going to talk about the miserable lives, miserable situations, but just that was kind of 1973, something that isn't out there. I can't quote this. I mean, I have to look at the name of the case. San Antonio
and actually read the decision, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is something that it tells us a lot about us, where we're so talking about how we move forward. This was a big step backwards, and it's the way we live today. It's the reason we live the way we do today in this country of inequality in schools, and it's not talked about.
It's not, and and the thing is you and I don't know about you. I mean, I was raised at public schools, and I got kicked out of a lot of them. But there's no doubt that, and my kids now, my son goes to Walnut Hills High School, high quality public school, probably gets a shit ton of, it's among, but it probably gets a shit ton of federal funding. And my daughter goes to Kilgore Elementary, also a well-funded public school. And so, my kids are getting reasonable educations, and a lot of it has to do, but the thing is the circumstances with these two schools are so far removed from what the general experience in the United States is, and part of me feels like, it's easy to sit in the catbird seat and say, hey, this is fucked up. It's not the way it's supposed to go. But the fact remains that these schools, let's just say for the sake of argument, that all of a sudden, just for these two schools, they decided to reject the typical model for how federal funding is allocated. Mm-hmm. And they flipped the script. And because these two schools had high test scores, they all of a sudden got the same money that some school in over the Rhine or some, East Kentucky University, somewhere around there. EKU, what's the name of that town down in Kentucky?
Shoot, I don't even know.
It doesn't matter.
It starts with an M. Is it Bowling Green? Is it Bowling Green?
No, it's where EKU is, and I can't remember the name of the town. And there's a couple little grade school elementary. It's just anyway. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is if they switched it, if all of a sudden the funding dried up, or it was equivalent to what they were getting in these places where the test scores were necessarily terrible and attendance was worse, nothing would change for these two public schools. There's a huge factor in the income of the students' families, the involvement of the students' families, the niceness of the area we live in, the safety of the area, the resources available already. There's so many factors involved that it's nothing if not a perfect example of why it shouldn't be like this. You know, these schools don't need the federal dollars that necessarily, by way congressional budgets and things work, have to be taken from another program. I mean, they're distributed in such a way. That was the thing that struck me as, you know, and you know, in hindsight, now I realize, I mean, it's just the way federal funding works for stuff. But one of the things I remember feeling about that book is that this should be fucking easy to change. It should be.
But the problem is you're exactly right. But the people that have are not saying what you're saying, where, hey, my school's going to be okay losing the money.
No, they're saying the opposite. They're saying you're going to sacrifice the accomplishments we've made for what?
They're saying two things, which is really interesting. Throughout the book, their whole argument is those schools don't need more money. You do not need to tax us more, because guess what? Money's not going to help those kids. And it's very racist and classist reasons. Number one, their parents don't care, or their values are bad. Okay. So money, if you throw money at them, they're still going to waste it. It's not going to go anywhere. Okay. That's one argument. But then their other argument is, you know, but so we say, well, what if we take the money from you? You saying you have all these values and you care about it, so you don't need the money. What if we take the money from you? Oh, no, you can't. So wait, right. Money does make a difference. Money does make a big difference. So right. That's the hypocrisy that they show in the book is these school districts, these wealthy school districts that are saying, one, we don't tax us more because that's not going to help. They don't need the money. But two, wait, you can't take a dime away from us.
Right. Because our programs will falter. Right. Yeah, which is absurd. Well, see, that's what I was saying before about how this is a conversation that can be extrapolated into a million different aspects of society in the United States right now. It's the idea that somehow necessarily somebody getting something means I'm losing something, and it's a mental thought process that colors a lot of what people in this country do.
They call it, at one point they call it leveling. They say if you level us, then that goes back to what we've heard about for, you know, when Bernie Sanders is running, is, oh, you want us all to be this socialist country where they're looking at Eastern Europe and, you know, during the Cold War, is this leveling is going to make us all mediocre, you know?
Right.
And how does that ruins us as a society? Leveling is almost this communist idea.
If nobody loses, nobody wins.
Exactly. And who's going to, and then that brings us to another point. Like you said, I'm just going to throw stuff on there as I think of it.
No, we're going to go all over the fucking place, man. And we're not going to be talking about this book like in 10 minutes.
Right. But if nobody wins, and that was the other thing they point, you know, the one thing the conservative lawyers or whatever are coming out and saying, hey, we all can't be generals. We need a lot of soldiers, or, you know.
But then the thought process, and I hate to simplify things because I mean there's a lot of tiers to all of this. Then the thought process should be, let's make better soldiers. The thought process should be, then the educational system is where it starts. It's where you get, you know, there's nothing better than a better educated worker. Oh, and you got to pay them more. Yeah, whatever. They're producing better. You know, there's a lot of theories that are attached to the way education affects, you know, all kinds of shit in the country. General happiness, gross domestic product, you know, involvement in politics. It's just, there's a million different things that a better education system produces that you would think the people that are crying about the distribution would want. You would think that the average person, this all comes down to this idea that that profit should come first. It's like, and by the way, that Kozol doesn't talk a lot about privatization until later in that book,
right?
You know, and it's just a couple little quick blurbs about, you know, the options available, and that's another thing too, is this idea that's really, really strong, it seems right now, that privatization is something that we should be moving towards, that everybody has the opportunity to pay for the school they want, and blah 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 blah, which is exactly the kind of thought process that fucks huge portions of the country. You know, it's just I don't understand why this is one of those things where it confuses me when the goal's not universal.
Right.
Where raising well-educated people, no matter what their background, isn't something that we all want, and we're all
as the United States, and we talk about equality, and we're saying for all, and that is one of our founding ideas. And let me just read this real quick point. It says why everything should be equal too, but the government, of course, does not assign us to, because they were saying, hey, there's always going to be differences. You know, if you go in a rich family, you get to go to summer camp. You get to do these things. Does that mean these poor kids get to go to summer camp? No, but here's the main difference. The government, of course, does not assign us to our homes or our summer camps or our doctors. It does assign us to our public schools. Indeed, forces us to go to them. Unless we have the wealth to pay for private education, we are compelled by the law to go to public school, and to the public school in our district. Thus, the state, by requiring attendance but refusing to require equity, effectively requires inequality. And I think that's should be the main argument right there, is if you have to go and the state and the taxes are paying for it, then they should be equal across the board, unless you're private.
Right.
That brings us into the other issue you were talking about.
And that's the thing is I agree with that. Like, I don't consider it some kind of fascist decree that we should educate our people. You know, I don't. I'm perfectly fine with there being minimum educational requirements for people in the United States, you know, and I understand that there's a lot of ways out. You know, you can stop going to school at 14 if you really want to in some parts of the country, whatever. But I really think, I don't know. I just don't understand. And I just don't understand why it's not more important. I don't understand where just a general basic education for every person in this country, and I'm even outside of the idea of equality and you know, opportunity. You know, it's just best for our society. I don't understand. There was a time when it was kind of like an accepted and respected circumstance, and I would guess that somewhere probably around that decision you were talking about in '54, all of a sudden this was something that was kind of shunned and poo-pooed as not important, and these kind of disparities that have been grown out of that circumstance just keep getting worse. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
Well, Thurgood Marshall, in his rebuttal to the Supreme Court ruling that took us back before Plessy, he said pretty much beyond the reason that we should just create equality, because we state that we're under the 14th Amendment, we got to bring equality down to everybody. Beyond that reason, we have to educate for two main reasons. Number one is to understand people's rights, so they understand their rights, especially the freedom of speech. But number two, they should become educated voters.
Right. Educated voters and educated. And that's the thing, is I almost don't even give a fuck about that. It's an educated contributor to society. It's the best for everybody.
The educated voter is huge right now. Look how many people vote against their own
self-interest.
Yes. And so those are the people, and we're seeing it right now. I mean, you go back to, I don't care when I teach in history, you know, these people voted, I would say predominantly, they weren't swayed by a lot of things. If they were farmers or whatever, they were voting for their self-interests, for the
but that's not uncommon. You know what? I think a bigger travesty in recent years, and I mean no offense, but I think a bigger travesty in recent years has been disillusioned educated voters. The ones who haven't participated for personal reasons, as though if they felt like they've been excised from the system for whatever reason. It can cope, you know, to me,
both ways.
It can go both ways. The educated voter to me isn't as crucial, and I don't see it as broad an appeal as the contributor to society in a myriad of other ways. You know, and I'm not trying to discount the importance of the voting, but it's just, you know, I don't know, man. It's a no-brainer.
Two-party system, you're right. Things go different ways when you have a two-party system.
The two-party system, and do you know anybody that doesn't? How many times have you heard people you know and like and respect say things like, well, it's, you know, clearly a failure, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, I get pushed into that on Facebook. I get bullied, like, hey, you gotta
you know with a every 5-year sentence, or every sentence, there we go. Here we are, every 5 years. No, with an every 5-year census and an absolute federal outlawing of gerrymandering in any way, shape, or form, we might find ourselves in a circumstance where it would work, at least the way it's supposed to.
You're right.
And you
Those
know, and
two
that's,
things are doable. It's funny. I've never had
are
somebody.
they?
Yeah, with the powers that be right now, no, not at all. But a census should, yeah, you're right. We're stumbling over ourselves right now in the census, but
Every 5 years.
yeah, it should be every 5 years, and it's easy to do. But gerrymandering, how did that ever become legal?
I
I
don't know.
honestly don't understand that. I don't
I don't
understand
know.
how that ever became democratic or.
The first time I was looking at that, it didn't make any sense to me. And then when I finally grasped what the fuck was going on, I was just like, I mean, there hasn't been a legitimate election based on representation in a large municipal area in this country in 50 years.
Yeah. It's funny. When I moved to Loveland, I'd lived in Loveland for a long time. I moved back to the west side, and then I moved back to
Right.
Loveland. And
You went on vacation out west.
yeah. So I remember my neighbor in his yard when I moved back to Loveland had a Shabbat sign. And for those of you who don't know, Steve Shabbat had been my Congress representative on the west side of Cincinnati, where I'd lived
Yep.
pretty much my whole life. He's pretty much been our representative my whole life.
Yep.
And when I went back to Loveland, he had a Shabbat sign. I live on the other side of the city, and he was not the representative over there. And it was a redistricting, a redraw, where they literally just redrew that District 1 to go, west side up across the city. Let me grab other white conservative areas and whip back around. And
man. Now, if you're a fan of modern art, you pull up some of these district maps.
Hey, that's something you could do. You could, run with that.
I could district maps and just kind of have a computer arbitrarily assign colors to areas.
Right.
Might be interesting.
We do. I think there was one. I think it was one in Virginia that is like where I used it in 8th grade to teach gerrymandering because it just is because
it was so ridiculous. It's like here's the clearest example.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's the clearest example.
Yeah.
Well, this goes back. This goes back to the issue of equality in this country and what constitutes rights and I hate the phrases like entitlements, and I hate I don't know. I find it the last 3.5 years or so has been really eye-opening as far as how far we haven't come, really. Yes. And how perspectives are, and and I mean, shit. It's just I don't know what there is to do about it.
I'll tell you, that's why I was depressed. Kim asked me.
I know a lot of people that are depressed watching this stuff.
So I mean, I know the problems in education. Obviously, I'm in education.
Right.
I taught in Cincinnati Public. I love teaching in Cincinnati Public.
What's the comparison? Really quick.
Yeah.
So you went. I mean, you've straddled these two ends of the spectrum. Right? I mean, you're not in a public district now, right?
I'm public school, but not Cincinnati Public.
Not Cincinnati Public. See, okay. I'm sorry. What I meant to say is you're not in a private school now. So you're looking at both ends of the spectrum. You're looking at public school system, not different than Walnut Hills and Kilgore, even though we're part of CPS, which people could argue was a struggling system. And then you've been in where were you at CPS again?
I was at Withrow and Woodward.
I mean, these are clear examples of that other end of the spectrum.
Oh, yeah. Sure. The only thing that I saw that the accomplishments they've made since this book was written, the only ones are with the school buildings. When I started at Woodward, it's really funny. When I was at Withrow, which was one of the most gorgeous school buildings in the city.
Beautiful. I live right across the street from that. Right?
Oh, I didn't know you were that close. It's gorgeous. But when I taught there, when I was in my student teaching, I took a camera and I went through just because.
Architecture.
It was devastating.
Oh, it was
fucked up. Walls falling down,
shit.
the ceilings coming down. No, because this was 2003 before they did the renovation, and so for me to walk through that school and just see the crumbling architecture. Now, since then, this is what I said is a good thing. Since then, they've redone that building. I have not been in it since. I'm sure it's gorgeous. Then when I moved to Woodward High School, I was in the old building for its final year.
Right, before they tore it down.
Before they tore it down, and I moved to the new building. So one of the good things is when you read about this book, and I'm hoping I think it is a theme that goes across the country, is the the physical structures are getting better. Every other problem still exists. And one thing I want to add, though, why I left Cincinnati Public I loved it. But in the book, they mentioned my exact situation. Is these schools, one of the biggest problems with these schools is they, unlike my school, you can work on a budget you're going to have for next year. With these big districts, these poor districts, they really just say, no, make no plans. Your budget
Right.
is cut in half.
Right.
And they until they know what they get. And so every year for 3 years in a row or so, I got called up in May and let go. And they would tell me, it's so funny. They said the same thing in this book. Hey, we're going to let you go, but you'll be hired back.
Right.
And I would be
in August.
In August,
Right.
the day before we're going to start.
Right.
And that's not their fault, but that's because of how budgeting worked. They literally would find out a day or two before they start that you can hire.
Yeah, what the staff would be. Yeah, what the staff would be like.
The only reason I left is because I was going to start a family, and you can't live like that. You can't live wondering, especially in education.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna have sex all the time, you have to have peace of mind.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. I needed to know I was okay.
Right. Without a doubt.
Yeah. So Cincinnati Pub, but every other problem that we see here is, and that's what was depressing. Kim's looking at me every night, and she's like, "You enjoying that book?" I said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "It's so depressing. We have come nowhere. Look at segregation." I'm going to throw this out here. Are we ever going to be a segregated society? I mean,
desegregated.
Yeah.
No. Do you want to know why?
Yeah.
It's because our cultures are that different. I mean, there's going to be lines crossed, and I think there's aspects of society as far as racial relationships go that I think have changed immensely and improved a lot. Like my kids have no idea. My kids, I mean, I toss off some arbitrary comedic racism that I'm actually trying to work on removing from my whole thing. But my kids they don't have a racist, they don't see it. It's not something, and thank God that they've gone to these really great public schools that just happen to be, fairly, what's the word I'm looking for? Diverse. Yeah. They happen to be fairly, and my kids, they just don't, like, it's never even been a conversation until, when Five was 14 or 15 and he heard me say something and he's like, "Dad, that's pretty racist." So, so he's calling me out on stuff, I think we have a generation coming up that's like firmly of the understanding that we're all essentially just human beings. But at the same time, though, there's some cultural things that are never going to be the same it just is between the cultures, whether it's Hispanic or African American or whatever it might be. I always said to people, you have to acknowledge you have to acknowledge the similarities and embrace the differences.
But here's the problem in Cincinnati, because essentially
Cincinnati is terrible.
Yes, because the problem is here. I think what your example is right. What I love to see, desegregation, integration. Yes, but
it can't be forced. Right. It has to be an economic circumstance with the development of a community in that direction.
But if you have a city like Atlanta where it works, where they're not integrated, great, but you know what, economically, you have a lot of the Black population that are doing well, that are successful economically.
Do you think it's at a higher level in Atlanta than it is in other parts of the country? Because every statistic I've ever seen in that regard in recent years has been that the disparities are pretty much the same nationwide as they've always been.
It seems like there's more success in Atlanta, but I don't know. I'm just saying in Cincinnati, there's none. I mean, honestly, you look at Cincinnati, very small, I don't live in I live in a condominium but guess what? There's no diversity in this condominium.
Come to my neighborhood, man. I live in Hyde Park and I got tons of diversity.
Do you? But I'm just seeing, you go to Loveland, you go to these areas, you're not seeing the equality as far as economics go, the financial equality. Do you see that? Or
well, I don't know, man. And so many of these, we kind of seized on the racial thing, but so much of this is class anyway. Yeah. It comes down to the same circumstance.
Well, that's what the line. The line in the book is race and class. It's a scholar's argument. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
These pretty much are the same things in our country. And to be able to nitpick the differences is really this high level argument that you're not going to really get to the bottom.
Yeah, well, it always makes me think of that. This is going to seem really marginally related, but this kind of conversation, and I kind of alluded to this before when I said it's easy to sit where I am based on the circumstances of my kids' education.
Right.
But there's a scene in the movie Platoon where Charlie Sheen's getting called out while he's smoking pot, digging a shithole for being a rich kid in Vietnam, and some guy's like, you could have got out of this, you could have got out of it. And Charlie Sheen goes on this little speech. He's like, I was getting high with these guys and all my friends were going, and I just thought it was bullshit watching the lower class kids get drafted and rich kids just keep getting away with it. So I enlisted. Right. And the dude he's talking to goes, man, you got to be rich in the first place to even just think like that.
Have a thought like that. No, yeah. I agree.
Because anybody that's not in that circumstance, they're just getting out. No, but, I don't know, man. There's so many things in this country that come down to nothing but money. And it's, it just, for being the land of opportunity, it certainly is if you have the right skin color and the right income. And I just think it's an absolute travesty. It seems like we have such a high percentage of intelligent, thoughtful people who understand the importance of community, regardless of anything more than the fact that we're in a community together. I just find it terrible that it's still this bad, and that it's still so sharp and so acute, and so some other word that means the same thing as those two.
I totally agree. When you see the hope, and I reading Kozol, he has hope. And he's thinking,
he does have hope.
If things in 20 years, it's going to be better. And then I watched a YouTube video of him in like 2005. It'll be better, hopefully, before I die.
It's 2020.
It comes to it, and he comes to it, and it's like, man, we're not getting anywhere.
Well, what are the answers?
Well, I want to throw this back at you though before we get there. This is about, and I don't know if you remember the book, and this is about Cincinnati.
Yeah, there was a piece in it. Yeah, but it was
which surprised me. It talks about Lower Price Hill.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was the West End. Yeah,
West End. But then he says this is just to see, because you said you have two kids in the Cincinnati district, but they're at the good schools, and he's talking about Cincinnati. He talks about Walnut Hills, and I want to just read this real quick to you. Cincinnati, like Chicago, has a two-tier system. Among the city's magnet and selective schools are remarkable institutions such as Walnut Hills, a famous high school that my hosts compared to a de facto private school within the public system.
Yeah.
It is not known if a child from Lower Price Hill has ever been admitted there. I'm sure that's changed, hopefully. Few of these children, in any case, would have had the preparation to compete effectively on the exams that they would have to take in order to get in. Long before they leave this school, most of their academic options are foreclosed. So my question, just to wrap back into this, is, I look at Walnut Hills, and it's a anybody can test in, but really,
I think it's still the local school, though. I think there's kids in the neighborhood.
That's what I was going to say.
It's still their local school. I think there's a certain number of kids that have to be admitted from actually within the district, because it's their 7 through 12.
Right.
And I want to be very clear about the words I think.
Yeah, me too. If I haven't said that, me too.
But it's just. It's a school you have to test into, and so be it. I don't know. I've never heard that nobody from Lower Price Hill has ever tested into it. I find it unlikely.
I find it unlikely now. Oh, God, I would hope so.
You see, that goes back to what we were talking about before. It's just like, one of the arguments about where the money goes and why it goes to it. You kind of touched on a little of this before, with people arguing that the money would be wasted in a district with kids like that, or parents like that, or a neighborhood like that, or a building like that, or whatever it might be. I think there's a step further back you could go that would, if nothing else, create people willing to fight against the circumstance the way it's set up now, and that's to compensate people in education better, as a career and as a job. It's something that's been devalued kind of systematically for decades. And it's, and the funny thing is it's like, people like myself, not too different from myself anyway, who are sniffing the edge of upper middle class, living in the fringe of the 4528 school zip code. You know, a lot of times we're assuaged by those fine stories about the plucky ragtag bunch of students overcoming whatever odds to accomplish, you know, pick a movie, Lean on Me.
Sure, right.
You know, but I really think that if there was a concentrated and legitimate effort for every local school district to not only find the idealist with the plan to help you know, build the hearts and minds of kids as they grow up, but to compensate them accordingly so that they can make these people in a circumstance where they can dedicate themselves to what they really would love to do. I really think that if there was some focus given on the people that were administrators and teachers in public programs, and to find a way to attract and retain the people that were right for those gigs, then I think a lot of these other things would fall in place. And I think that's where the biggest failing has been. And it's a personal opinion, obviously, over the last 50 years, that I think dovetails into all these other things too. When legislation passes like this, where the test scores are, attached to the funding in exactly the wrong fucking way, that's a result of not the right people saying the right things at the right times. There's not enough soldiers in the fight. There's not enough people who have a vested interest, and the people, you know, you alluded to this before as well, the people that are educated, who understand the value and the importance of educating their children, they're involved in the public system that their kids in, or they're paying for a system their kids are in.
Yep.
You know, and the idea is to make it so that it doesn't have to be that cut and dry. So some kid who lives in the inner city somewhere in the Southwest, whose dad's undocumented and his mom's never home because she's working, is still somehow has access not just to the resources and the facilities for the education, but the teacher,
somebody that understands, to inspire,
not necessarily inspire, but at least
motivate.
Anchor, the word I'm looking for. Some kind of person who can, you know, I don't know, illustrate how important the kind of shit is.
Yeah, and to show, I don't know. You're exactly no right. When teachers become when teaching becomes no longer a success story, when it becomes like, oh, you know, I would never want to become a teacher, that you lose a lot of say in the classroom, and like, you're not going to be motivating students. And we are headed that direction. We're not, again, the depressing part is we are looking to get teachers in there quickly without full education. You know, that came in a program called Teach for America, where, you know, you didn't have to have your teaching license.
You didn't even have to have an associate's or anything. You just wanted, if you wanted to do it, you could do it.
Yeah, give your time up, because really that's all it takes is just, you know, your time, your babysitting, essentially. And what they did, thankfully, Teaching America, I don't think is as strong as it was once, but it did give our industry a hit. You know, there was a long standing for a while where every teacher, or at least in most districts, you were working on your master's, you know, and have your master's, and that started to fall back because of this program that came involved. You know, every teacher I know got into it. Not, you know, we believe in the profit motive, but we don't live that way.
Yeah, well,
I know
that doesn't shock
me. Do it for the right ways. Yeah.
See, that's the thing, and you know, and I guess somebody could argue that, you know, but while the financial compensation is what it is, then you're gonna attract people that are in it for the right reasons. But it doesn't. I mean, it's more than that.
But there's a point. Yeah, there's a point where I'm working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and yeah, you believe me, teachers at my age are still looking. Is there an opportunity out there somewhere else?
Where you can still somehow have the influence but survive better. And then the other thing too is the societal attitude towards teachers. You know, I was just talking about the classic Hollywood movie. When was the last time we had one of those classic Hollywood movies where a teacher made the difference in somebody's life? Right. You know, I mean,
early 2000s, right? Yeah, or 90s.
You know, I don't know, man. It just there's so many different aspects of American society that have changed so much just in our short lives that you know, and it's easy to like kind of throw your hands up and be like, fuck, it's idiocracy, it's all over. You know, and me and my buddy Brian Driscoll, we talk all the time about, you know, what do we do what's the change we could make? And, I don't know if it's enough to just talk about it, but I really think that, if anybody out there was going to, pick up a torch for something in particular, education is not a bad place to fucking start.
It's not, and we're in trouble right now, with Betsy DeVos.
Dude, we're in trouble. We're in trouble in so many ways.
Right, but the privatization, they are trying to make us crumble. And
what they're trying to do with this is the thing I was alluding to before when I said we're going to go different places. The privatization of education is nothing more than it's just another side effect of this kind of frightening circumstance where the American style of capitalism has finally reached this head. Capitalism. It's not. See, that's the thing is I don't have capitalism, in its basic form is, it's a reasonable way.
Oh, you're selling shoes?
Yeah,
I'm all about capitalism.
American capitalism, where it's the bottom line is profit at whatever circumstance makes the most money. I mean, right now, and people would argue that it's been like this forever. Politicians have always been on the take or whatever. But I've never in my life seen a government more for profit and less for the people in my existence. Yep. And the situation with DeVos and it's the same thing. You just got to follow the money. Who's profiting from it and why marginalizing more people. It just, I don't know, man. It's terrifying. It's a failure on so many levels, and I just don't. It's unsustainable on so many levels.
But people don't realize it, and that's because of the lack of education.
Right? Good. You're right. Good comedy always comes full circle.
That's right. All right. Hey, well, I'm also doing another rule that Scott taught me. Is
40 minutes.
Keep it to 45 minutes. So, thank
Mike,
you.
Thank you so much, and I want to apologize for not reading the book again.
No, as I told Scott, said this a couple times this week. Hey, my book's not here. I apologize, and I said it doesn't matter. You've read we had a great conversation. You read it once, it got what it needed. Now you couldn't have done that with this book. Okay,
what do you got there? Murder in Memory of Northern. Oh, are you sending me that?
Well, you can have it when I'm done. But this is
okay.
Ashley and I are talking about this next week.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. I'll see if I can dig it out. I actually and I wasn't kidding before when I said I already ordered The Death of Expertise. So I'll be ready for that motherfucker. Yeah, dude, here's the thing. I think it's really important. One of the things I'm trying to do, and I think you are too, is to try and make sure that everyone has a sense of the fact that we're all in this together, and there's good, important, and meaningful things we can do and discuss as we all struggle through these weird times. And I want to thank you very much for having me, and I hope I didn't bullshit too badly.
No, I loved it. And you're exactly right. I think this communication is key, and we're learning that right now because of quarantine.
Which is a kind of a drag in some ways, but I really think, I hope that, actually, I don't hope things get bad enough for it to come to this, but I would just like to think that the human race eventually is going to have to come together, and the American people are going to have to come together soon too. It's just going to keep getting worse until they do.
We got to stay positive, right?
We do, man.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
My pleasure, man. Love you, brother. Have a great night.
You too, man. Take care.
Bye. Take care.